Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the French Connection's special Sunday edition. My name is Daryl Bradford Smith, and today's date is November 26th, 2006, and you are listening to the French Connection. And again, it is great to have you here with me today. You know, I have done a few files in the last few days here, very important ones. We've talked about a myriad of subjects, and in fact, yesterday, or day before yesterday, I called for the dismantling of the Jewish Zionist state of Israel.
Oh, yes.
And I also called for the Pakistanis to provide nuclear bombs to the Iranians to protect themselves from the Israelis. Now, whether any of those things will happen is a billion to one shot, but you know something, in the right world, in a good world, in a fair world, the Iranians would have every right on earth to protect themselves from these criminals in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv. However, we don't live in a just world. What we know is we live in a world controlled by deception and lies, and we live in a world where the human life is of little value to the people that are in charge of our world. And so what we're going to do today is bring up someone who has been a part of the French Connection for a long time. He's one of the leading researchers in the last 100 years on this subject. His name is Eustace Mullins. He's a friend of mine, and I couldn't be prouder to have him here with me again for another installment of the French Connection. Are you with me, Eustace?
Oh, yes, indeed.
Well, it's great to have you back, Eustace. Do you find any resistance to the things I just said about providing protective devices for the Iranians? I mean, don't they have a right to protect themselves from these criminals in Israel?
Well, Israel has the greatest atomic weapons collection in the world, so the whole world has to protect themselves against them.
Well, because they've got the Americans with their weapons behind them, don't they?
Well, there really is no Israel. It's just an American front.
See, that's important to understand for people. And when you take a look at how the Congress has been bought and paid for, and we here at the French Connection have done a lot of research on how these people become compromised in our Congress, Eustace. We know that they use pedophilia, they used homosexuality, they use, of course, bribery and extortion, and then they use their friends. And are all of those things well used by the controllers to keep congressional committees and everything in check?
Well, the whole legislative process in the United States over the last 100 years has been more and more bureaucratic, more Byzantine, and more hidden from the people. It's everything in Washington is an elaborate shell game. And that's
but don't they use the things like pedophilia to hold people in check? Because we've found so many. I mean, look at this guy Barney Frank out of Massachusetts. He had a 15-year-old prostitute living in his Georgetown flat, and he was getting this 15-year-old to run out, and they were doing tricks and everything. I mean, this is a leading congressman with a Harvard degree using children.
Oh yes, they've been doing that for years. I think that started in the Roosevelt administration in 1932. Because you see, you had widespread poverty, and so when it came to buying bodies, well, they were very cheap.
But didn't this also get proliferated when Hoover was in the FBI? Because he was a creepy guy doing some strange things as well, wasn't he? Sexually, he was a very bizarre man.
Well, you know, in 1955, Nation magazine, which was the leading intellectual Marxist magazine in the world, did a series called The Home Intern, which described a international homosexual community which operated everywhere in the world and had its devotees. It was like the Communist International, but it was just Home Intern. And that was very prevalent in Washington.
Well, it seems like they get the biggest support financially from the Jewish supporters in the background is these ultra liberal homosexual politicians. We've got this guy from New Jersey there, the governor, and and then we've got this new guy from Florida there that just got caught being a homosexual. I mean, they're all over the Congress.
Well, they're all over the Congress, and everybody in Washington's known that for years. Now, when I was on Capitol Hill in the 40s, there was practically nothing of this going on. What was going on at that time was that the most powerful senators in Washington had sons 40 or 45 years old, and these sons of these senators were cruising Lafayette Park every night and picking up soldiers and so forth. and it was very well known. There were newspaper stories at that time, but that was considered the extent of the homosexual operation. Now it's a homosexual all the way.
Well, yeah, and George Bush, it is said, has had a visitor by the name of Jeff Gannon visit his White House, over 200 visits, many of them at night, many of them in the private quarters, and many times he didn't leave the White House. In other words, he signed in at the Secret Service entry desk, but never signed out. And he is a known male prostitute in Washington, D.C., as well as a website promoter of porn, of male porn. And he was given a false name and ready access to the White House's inner corridors. Now,
oh, he was a favorite there, Johnny Gosh.
Well, do you think he was Johnny Gosh? I don't think he was.
Well, people from New York told me that, and they seem to know what they're talking about. They told me this 3 or 4 years ago. And
well, he doesn't have the same look, and you know, the mother says that it isn't him.
Oh, she does say that. Mm-hmm.
I talked to Noreen Gosh about this. In fact, I've talked to John DeCamp as well, the guy that blew the cover on that Franklin cover-up with that Larry Franklin out in Omaha. And we've got Warren Buffett involved in this kind of depravity, and it even went into the Reagan White House, this kind of sickness.
Oh, it did indeed. They came in with those neocons from the Hoover Institute at Stanford University, and they really parked themselves there. They've been there ever since.
Do you know much about the Stanford Research Institute being an arm of the Tavistock group, using information from Tavistock? Because Tavistock is where much of the disinformation hits the airwaves. A lot of the stories come out, and a lot of the manipulations on television come out of Tavistock. Do you know anything about that group?
Oh, yes, I've written about it in my book, The World Order, because the Tavistock group, initially they were to control bureaucratic officials, and they moved in on the university officials, and all the foundations were Tavistock people, and so they established a little monopoly of their own there, and that's continued to the present day.
And are they involved in what goes out on our television airwaves? Because if you watch recent, in the last 5 years, the series of television programming has become darker and more ominous and more sick, and it's all about the end of the world. It's about 6 feet under grave shows. It's about Dead Like Me, being a dead person coming back to life. It's all about sickness and death, and it's really shifted in the last few years. Now, there seems to me that there's a concerted effort to write scripts that are focused on very sick themes.
Oh, that's very. As a writer, I've noticed with incredulity that the only writer for many years has been Stephen King, and Stephen King is a hack writer of the lowest order, and he started turning out this craft to frighten children, you know, and it was the most moronic stuff I ever saw in my life, and this one suddenly saturated the airwaves of Stephen King's stories. They published. They ran them over and over all day and night.
Well, they've got lots of Stephen King types of things now, and I'm wondering if it's not to ready the population for these dark days. I mean, you would come to expect that this was the next phase in your life. These end of the world kind of shows, and after the they're about after the Armageddon and how do you survive, and it's just horrendous programming, and it's actually making its way to the French airwaves now.
Oh, it is, for heaven's sake. Well, yeah, I wouldn't think anybody in Europe had paid attention to this nonsense because it's for 4 years old. It's the boogeyman, you know, and they really saturate television with it, and it's been going on constantly, and it gets worse all the time.
Well, isn't this what Myron Fagan was also alluding to in some of his lectures that he talked about?
Oh, yes, Myron knew this was going on because he was in with the top screenwriters in Hollywood, and he was one of the most prolific at all. I don't know what programs he anyway, he came up with a tremendous distaste for this sort of thing. He suspected what they were what they were trying to do, and he began to resist it, and they finally ran him out of Hollywood. I knew him in his last years in New York, and he was a hunted man.
Well, you know, the interesting thing is they've spun the idea that that aliens are actually in existence, which is really foolishness beyond anything. And you know how many hundreds of millions of people in the world believe this crap? And I'm wondering, Eustace, do they have an intention of using the idea that we're being invaded somehow? Did they get the idea from H.G. Wells? I mean, do these controllers really think someday they'll be able to use, let's say, oh my goodness, the world's being invaded by aliens or something?